Okay, hello everyone. Hello everyone. Okay, so first we would like to say that the shiur is sponsored. Leilui Nishmat Mel and Sylvia David by their families, Menachem Mendel Ben Avram Meir V'Tovia Rivka, Tzvia Chaya Bat Aryeh Lev V'Chava Ida Zichronam Livracha, Sheyeh Leilui Neshama. Okay, so we started 2 weeks ago because of the war. 3 weeks ago. Wow, all right, nachon. About rabbinic nepotism. So I don't think I need to do too much of a summary. I think you all remembered. Moshe Rabbeinu, in 4 different sources, is looking for a job for his children. Sometimes we ask the question of why would he think that they should get the job? By the way, also one question that I didn't ask 2 weeks ago was, to who? He has 2 children. Who should get it? Menashe or Gershom? So you say maybe the Bechor, maybe both of them somehow. So that's an interesting thing by itself. But we spoke a little bit about the assumption, like why would you assume that one of them should be the leader? That was the question number 1. The second question is, what was the answer? What was the answer that he received? And with some of the answers he probably was more convinced, and with some of them he was a little less. Okay. So take a look at page 2, in the middle of page 2, Shmot Perek Mem. Okay. ומשכת אותם כאשר משכת את אביהם וכיהנו לי והייתה להם למשמרת והייתה להם מושכתם לכהונת עולם לדורותם. ויעש משה ככל אשר ציווה השם אותו כן עשה. Which means when it comes to kehuna, when it comes to priesthood, it goes b'yerusha. There is nepotism, and it's really not called nepotism, it's called yerusha, inheritance, not only in terms of monetary inheritance, but also a position inheritance, which means the Kohanim will be Kohanim because their father was a Kohen. Okay. So now the Gemara says in Ketubot something interesting. Tanu Rabbanan. Bishat ptirato shel Rabbi. So when Rabbi passed away, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, we all know a little bit about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Amar lebanai ani tzarich. Please bring my children in. Bring them to my room. I would like to talk to them. Nichnesu banav etzlo. So his children entered the room. Amar lahem. So now he told them, I think it's outside. Amar lahem. So he said to them, first, izaharu bichvod imchem. I'm warning you to respect your mom. After I die, you should respect your mom. Now, why would he say that? Isn't that obvious? So, I know, everyone knows stories that people didn't do it. But I think there is something interesting. There are 2 interesting things here. Rabbi, what? So, the lesson might be that the first concern of a dying husband is that the kids will take care of his wife. That's A. Okay, which means their mother. Okay, very good. B, and I think it's interesting. No, Izaharu b'chvod imchem, your mom. Oh yeah, okay, your mom. Because she's not Ishto anymore after he dies. She has no husband, so she's not his wife. But the idea is, I think, there is even more than that. He's a Rabbi. He's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And she is his wife. When he is gone, she is what? And nothing. Sorry. Her entire thing is being Rabbi's wife. We don't know anything about her, really. Nothing. We know about Rabbi Akiva's wife, we know about Rabban Gamliel's wife, we know about Rabbi Meir's wife, for sure. We know about Rava's wife, Rav Nachman's, but we don't know anything about Rabbi's wife. And after she will lose her husband, she's going to lose her status. And don't forget, if one of his kids will continue in his footsteps, it will mean what? That his wife will be the first lady, and she, by the way, this issue when you look at the history, when you look at kings in the Middle Ages, okay, one of the major concerns of the queens was what? After the husband dies, how do they try to continue to keep and to safeguard somehow their position? So some of it, they would love to have a weak king that they can manipulate, or a little child to be the king. So it will give them another 10, 15 years to what? To manipulate and to control, because if not, some of them would lose everything they have, which is very interesting, which is, by the way, just as a good educational thing, that a wife, even if she's married to a very famous person, she needs to be on her own right, okay? Not only to be Aisha Shel, okay? So that's, we learned it also, by the way, from Sarah. She was not only Avram's wife. She was Sarah by herself. Okay, so that's the second thing. And so that is Zaharu b'chvod imchem. Then, ner yehe daluk bimkomo, meaning a candle should be kindled in its place where it is now. Shulchan yehe aruch bimkomo, mita tehem mutzad bimkoma, meaning do not change a thing in my room. That's pretty interesting. Let's call it interesting, surprising. I would think that Rabbi knows he's not coming back like tomorrow. If he dies, he dies. He's not coming back to his room. We will see that he did come back almost every Erev Shabbat. But leave that alone, because really everything I said until now, that's not the topic of my shiur. My topic starts here. Yosef, Chofni, Shimon, Ephrati, so Yosef and Shimon, not his children, Hem shimshuni bechayai, vehem yeshamshuni bemoti. They served me while I was alive, and they will serve me after I'll die, which means they will be one of the people who carry my bed and will take care of me and everything. Now, what about his children? Shimon bni, that's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Chacham. He's a sage, he's a scholar. Gamliel bni, Nasi. He's going to be the president. Chanina bar Chama, Yeshev Barosh. And Chanina he will be the chairman, okay? So Baruch Hashem, we got it all. Now Chanina bar Chama, definitely it's not his son. How do I know? Bar Chama is not Bar Rebbe, right? So we have Shimon and Gamliel are Rebbe's children. And he says Shimon will be a sage, Gamliel will be the president, and Chanina will be the chairman. Shimon bni chacham mai ke'amar. What does it mean? Hachi ke'amar. Af al pi she'Shimon bni chacham, even though that my son Shimon is a smart person, Gamliel bni nasi. Gamliel will be the president. Which means what? What is the president? The president, it may be a very prestigious position, but it's more political. You need to represent the Jewish people in the eyes of the Romans, and you need to you are the leader of the community. Not necessarily because you are necessarily the smartest, not that you are not smart, but you need to have different capabilities and different qualities. Amar Levi, Achik Amar, Af al pi she'Shimon bni chacham, Gamliel bni nasi. Amar Levi, tzricha lemeimar? So Levi says, do you need to say that? It's pretty obvious. What is pretty obvious? That Shimon should be the sage, and Gamliel should be the president. He says to him, Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe, so Rabbi Shimon says to him, tzricha lach velemitla'atach. It definitely you need it. And he was little, I guess he was insulted, Shimon. So he says to Levi was tzolea, he was limping. He was limping because of two main reasons. When he bowed down to Rav, he did it in a way that basically hurt his back, and also because he spoke harshly against God. So Levi was punished. So basically Shimon says to Levi, obviously my father had to say that you are limping. It's insulting. You would not expect that from someone, but it is what it is. So the Gemara says, "My kashyale, why Levi so said that you don't need it. רק כאמר, ואת הממלכה נתן ליהורם, כי הוא הבכור. ההוא ממלא מקום אבותיו הווה, ורבן גמליאל אינו ממלא מקום אבותיו הווה. ורבי מאי תאמה עבדכי, נין אינו ממלא מקום אבותיו בחוכמה, ביראת חטא ממלא מקום אבותיו הווה. Now we are going to really start the halachic discussion, which means, the question was, it says, ואת הממלכה נתן ליהורם כי הוא הבכור. Yehoram's father gave him the kingdom because he was what? The firstborn, which means, who should Rabbi give the position of being the president? Shimon. Shimon was the Bechor. But he gave it to whom? To Gamliel, which means you can give it to someone who is memale mekom avotav, someone who can basically walk in your shoes. But why do you give it to Gamliel? Answer, so the Gemara says, that's true. Gamliel was not as smart as Rabbi, but he appointed him to be the president, like taking on his position. Why? Because he had irat chet. Irat chet, which means he was God-fearing person, or was sin-fearing person. Now, this is an interesting thing. First and foremost, what do we see? Let's go one by one. First, Rabbi thought that he can that he can give as an inheritance his position to his children. No one objected to it. Okay, then who is the one who can be appointed to be my successor? Answer, he needs to be memale mekom avotav. He needs to replace his father to some extent. In what way? So we have chokhmah, and then we have irat chet. Chokhmah is always good, but irat chet seems to be that it's even more than chokhmah. Okay. Why do you need to have irat chet as a president? Manipulated and bribed, exactly. So you can be very smart, but when you see money, you might be less smart. So therefore, you need to have irat chet. Now, what do we learn from here halachically? And we will see the Rambam in a minute. That basically, you have the right to give your position to your children. A. B. The child does not need to be as smart as you, but he needs to have the right qualities for the position that you give him. Now, the Gemara does not discuss how exactly Shimon felt about it, or how even Gamliel felt about it. Can you imagine you going to your child and you say, come here, you are really smart. I'm so proud of you, but I can't give you my position because you are not God-fearing person. B'atzlacha. Second child, Gamliel, I like you very much. You are so not as your brother. You are not that smart. But you are a God-fearing person. It almost sounds like, in Shidduchim, how is she? Nechmada. Gomelet chasadim. Good personality. Right. Nachon, she's very kind. She will even go to the well to give water to your camels. But you still need to have Yefat Toar ve'Yefat Mareh, right? So the idea is that how as Rabbi told Gamliel, my son, you have work to do. You can be smarter, or maybe not. But you're a God-fearing person, and therefore I am going to appoint you to be what? To be the president. By the way, just as a side note, yeah. He says that's what Rabbi thought. Yeah, that's what Rabbi thought. Because I would imagine that the drama is that Shimon comes to his father and says, Abba, before you die, can I ask you one question? How come that I am not the president? What Rabbi will tell him? I would assume the truth. Okay. It can be being a sage, or it can be political wisdom. But if it was only political wisdom, I think the Gemara would say that Shimon was Chacham, and Rabban Gamliel was Chacham b'mediniyut, or something like that, in a way that the Gemara talks. Yes?
There are also many ways of saying things. One does not have to give a negative. You could say he's getting it because he's a God-fearing person, but the implication would be maybe the other person isn't. but you don't have to say you're this, but you're not this as an insult.
But if I'm smart enough, if I'm Shimon, I probably would understand it. Yes. Yeah. That he didn't groom them for their position, just like it might be, okay? Meaning it might be, by the way, I'll take you in just a second, it might be that sometimes, great leaders don't do what they're supposed to do while they're alive, and only when they die, they start giving those titles and positions, yes? Sometimes it doesn't go to one person, what's the joke? How many Jews need to change a light bulb? So the idea is that sometimes it needs. But look, also with Moshe Rabbeinu, after Moshe died, so Yoshua already took over, but Yoshua couldn't do anything without going to Elazar. So there was some kind of a duality in leadership. Okay, still Yoshua was the one, but he had an assistant. Okay, and Moshe didn't have anyone. Okay, so take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam says like that in הלכות כלי המקדש פרק ד' כשימות המלך או כהן גדול או אחד משאר הממונים, end of page 2, when the king dies or the Kohen Gadol dies or anyone else who was appointed to some kind of a position, even the head of the garbage collection, okay? Everyone, בנו או הראוי ליורשו וכל הקודם לנחלה קודם לשררות המת, so his son or someone else who is worthy to inherit him, he will get it, וכל הקודם לנחלה קודם לשררות המת. So if you are the firstborn, you obviously have the what? The first right of refusal, and then the second one and the third one. And then he says, והוא שיהיה ממלא מקומו בחוכמה, the child needs to what? To replace his father with wisdom, which, by the way, goes back to your question about wisdom. We all know, if the father, let's say, was in that position for 20, 25 years, wisdom can be also experience, can be the way to handle people and things like that. And maybe the child might be, he can score on the SAT much higher than his father, but he doesn't know how to deal with people. So, chokhmah means many, many things. So I agree. Or bi'ir'ah, so he needs to replace his father with chokhmah, with, let's call it wisdom, or just we'll call it chokhmah, okay? או ביראה, with fear, אף על פי שאינו כמותו בחוכמה. So fear is definitely, you need to have it. God-fearing person, you need it even more than חוכמה. שנאמר במלך, הוא ובניו בקרב ישראל, מלמד שהמלכות ירושה, והוא הדין לכל שררה שבקרב ישראל, שהזוכה לה זוכה לעצמו ולזרעו. So therefore he says, it's not only with king, it's not only with priesthood, which is in the Torah, but every appointment you received it for you and for your descendants. Now, let's stop here and let's try to analyze it negatively and positively. The negative is you basically create nepotism and you create a mafia. Mamish a mafia. Okay? Let's see, if I am I'm a doctor. Okay, and my son is a doctor, and my grandson is a doctor, and you are a doctor, and your son is a doctor, and your grandson is a doctor, and anyone else who would like to be a doctor can get in. Oh, it will be very difficult for him. So what's good in that? At the same time, especially if we talk about king or a governor or things like that, there is stability, exactly. And especially if, let's say, the father and the son somehow walk together or their years overlapped, most of the times the father will take his son to walk, not on a, like they do in the elementary school, that you take your child to your walk. How do you call it?
Yeah, it's like
yeah, something like that. To see what they do, the adults do. Not talking about that. Also, if, for example, if you're talking about, let's say, even the rabbinic dynasty, you grew up in a rabbinic house, so you know, be'erech, it can scar you for life or it can enrich you for life, right? So, in a way, you know. Now, the problem is that sometimes when you know what worked 30 years ago does not necessarily work now. Give me an example of someone who totally lost it. Rechavam, right? Rechavam grew up in his grandfather's house as a king, his father's house, Shlomo HaMelech, as a king, and then instead of listening to the old people, he listened to the young people and he lost it. Now I know Hashem wanted to, whatever, but the idea is that you can sometimes be raised by someone and learn the profession, and you can totally be a total failure. So we do see advantages and disadvantages. Now I will say one more thing. Also in the general society, the idea of giving the position and the titles to the children was something very common. If you are a lord, not the lord, yeah? If you are a lord, a knight, or whatever, a lord, I think, it's your family received some kind of a prestigious title, okay? And nobility, thank you, right? And by the way, it was so ingrained that they thought it's divine. I don't know if you read anything about nobility in history. They thought that God chose them. So there is a king, there is the nobility, and then there is the rest of them. Look, we also had it in Judaism to some extent. We had the Prushim, the Chaverim, and then the Amei Aratzot. It reached a point in the time of the Tanaim that it was terrible between scholars and people who were not scholars, to the extent that they will not allow them to touch them. Because if an Am Haaretz will touch a Rabbi, a Chaver, he will what? He will contaminate him. That's terrible. Think about it. Good Shabbos, move on. It's... Mama? I can't hear you.
Can you repeat?
I need to hear that first in order to repeat. Okay, I know, I understand. You're saying that something like that existed in the Beit HaMikdash, that someone who is Tameh cannot enter the Beit HaMikdash and touch a coin. That's what... Right, so the thing is that I can understand in Beit HaMikdash. That's a house of God, it's a holy place. Tameh cannot get in, and if a Tameh gets in, so he contaminates himself, or maybe he will contaminate someone else. Okay, that I can understand. I'm talking about just regular people in the marketplace. I'm a chaver and someone is an Am Haaretz. I will not let him even talk to me, so he will not spit on me. That was... No, chaver is an elite group that will eat TORAH b'tahara and will do all sorts of things. Okay. So that's what the Rambam says in Ilchot Klei HaMikdash. Then there is another Rambam in Ilchot Melachim. The Rambam in Ilchot Melachim, Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin, says the following. כשמעמידים המלך, so when you appoint the king, מושכים אותו בשמן המשחה, so you anoint him with oil, שנאמר, ויקח שמואל את פח השמן ויצוק על ראשו וישקהו. Shmuel took the little jar of oil and he anointed both really, Shaul and David, and then he gave him a kiss and he gave him to drink from it. ומאחר שמושכים המלך, and after you anoint the king, הרי זה זוכה לו ולבניו עד עולם. It's forever his. שהמלכות ירושה, שנאמר למען יאריך ימים על ממלכתו, הוא ובניו בקרב ישראל. By the way, you know that the first example is a bad example. Shaul. Shaul was a king and his son was not. Okay? So some people would say, because he was not from Shevet Yehuda, but that's not what the Rambam says. The Rambam, it seems to be that says that every king that is being anointed, his children will what? Will inherit it. But you will see another Rambam says no, only from Shevet Yehuda. Really, that's true. Only from Shevet Yehuda you will be anointed forever. If you are not from Shevet Yehuda, it's almost like for re-election. Yes?
David appointed the king Ashmael when Shaul was still the king? How does that work?
But he was only a king in potential, not a real king. That's also what Abigail, Naval Carmeli's wife, told him. She says to him, "Od lo yatsa tiv'acha," that's according to Chazal, "Lo yatsa tiv'acha ba'olam kemelech," meaning you are not known as a king yet. Because don't forget, it was in a very private way. Even Shmuel had to lie to some extent, to go to visit David. Okay, so Eniach ben Katan. So if the king died young and he had a child who is really a minor yet, משמרים לו המלוכה עד שיגדיל. So you keep for him the kingdom until this little child will grow up. מה? יואש, נכון, he was 7 years old. והבן הגדול קודם לקטן ממנו, and the older son is obviously takes precedent over the younger son, ולא המלכות בלבד, אלא כל השררות וכל המינויים שבישראל ירושה לבנו ולבן בן בנו עד עולם. So all the appointments are basically can go as a ירושה. והוא, שיהיה הבן ממלא מקום אבותיו בחוכמה וביראה, so he needs to replace him with wisdom and fear. היה ממלא ביראה, and if he was only a God-fearing person, but he was not yet that smart, אף על פי שאינו ממלא בחוכמה, even though he's not that smart like his father, מעמידים אותו במקום אביו, so you basically put him there to take over his father, ומלמדים אותו. You teach him. If someone is not that smart, you teach him. So here it's more about just knowledge. וכל מי שאין בו יראת שמיים, but if you are not a God-fearing person, אף על פי שחוכמתו מרובה, even if though you scored 800 on the SAT, אין ממנים אותו למינוי מן המינויים שבישראל. You are not going to get the appointment. Interesting, נכון? זה מעניין. Exactly. You can't teach someone יראת שמיים.
Doesn't sometimes this reflect upon the father in terms of transmitting values, though?
Indeed, and the punishment is that his son will not continue his legacy. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But look at it's amazing educational message. You would think, if you ask, you know what, it's an interesting exercise. You go to a for-profit company, and you say the CEO died, who should we appoint? Someone who is really, really smart but not that moral, or someone who is very moral but not that smart? What do you think they would say?
Smart, not so. We don't care about the moral. Nobody else.
It depends, right? Everyone is immoral. Who cares? I care only about the bottom line, right? Or some people would say, no, ma pitom, what are you doing, right? So it's very interesting. It's a great exercise.
I mean, you can, but it's much easier to.
That's what they say here. It's much easier to teach wisdom rather than morality. But that's what I'm saying. This is such an incredible educational lesson here. What is important for me, says the Rambam, based on the Gemara, is what? Yirat Shamayim. If you don't have Yirat Shamayim, you have nothing. Yes?
Leading up to the people to decide whether this person has Yirat Shamayim or not.
Okay, so maybe I will rephrase the question. Who is the one to decide? To decide. Like, what do you have? Like a test? How much Yirat Shamayim you have? Like you take the person, you put like $500,000, next to him and see if he puts his hand there, and then if he's not, so you raise it to $1 million. Like, what exactly are you doing? Now, Chacham or lo, I can have somewhat of a test. Through the years, I see if he answers questions, whatever. Yirat Shamayim, how do you measure Yirat Shamayim? Yes?
If that's the case, why were there so many kings that were not okay?
Oh, they didn't know the Rambam. Yes? No, the request for a king needs to be some kind of a dual effort of the people would say, Ve'amarta asima alai melech. The people would say, I would like to have a king. And then, Som tasim alecha melech asher yasim Hashem elokecha. That Hashem will choose for you. But that was only twice. Shaul and David. The rest of them were not exact. I mean, Shlomo, God loved and he gave him a name, but after that there is definitely no Yerovam, Natan Hanavi, Achia Shiloni, gave him some kind of an appointment. Yeah. Okay. So basically, what do we have here? So again, the educational message of Yirat Shamayim. If you don't have Yirat Shamayim, you can be the smartest guy ever, but you're not going to make the right decisions. And then he says, But that it says, אין ממנים אותו למינוי מן המינויים שבישראל. So you don't appoint him to anything. If he doesn't have יראת שמיים. Now, again, how do you measure יראת שמיים? לא יודע. I really don't know. I'm not trying to, I just don't know.
But were the kings of OUisrael, were they not the Bechor? I don't know.
Not always. Not always. And then it says, כיוון שנמשך דוד זכה בכתר המלוכה, מלכות, והרי המלכות לו ולבניו הזכרים עד העולם. So basically the right of being a king belongs to David and his descendants, excluding females. Females, women. It says only הזכרים. only זכרים. שנאמר כי שכה יהיה נכון עד עולם ולא זכה אלא לקשרים שנאמר אם ישמרו בניך בריתי. אף על פי שלא זכה אלא לקשרים לא תקראת המלוכה מזרע דוד לעולם. הקדוש ברוך הוא הבטיחו. So that's with David המלך, that God has a special promise for him that his kingdom will never cease to exist. Okay. So based on the Rambam, it seems to be that that's the halacha, that you should appoint your children for your positions. They require, the what? How many queens would we have in Jewish history? There was Shlum Tzion HaMalka and Helena. So these two were not appointed. They just appointed themselves after their husbands died. That's true. Okay. So now let's see this Gemara in Brachot. We all know the story. I'll just give a short introduction. That Rabban Gamliel, not Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi, before him. Rabban Gamliel had a little bit of a tenuous, I will call it tenuous situation between him and Rabbi Yehoshua. And it came to a point that Rabban Gamliel had enough. And he pushed Rabbi Yehoshua out of the Beit Midrash. The Talmidim didn't like this. And they didn't like the way that Rabban Gamliel behaved. Now, before I go any further, I need to give you a little bit of a timeline and some kind of an introduction. The Talmudic figures that we're dealing here with is Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So it's different generations, Tanaim. What do we know about Rabbi Yehoshua? Rabbi Yehoshua was a Talmid of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Remember Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai from Yavne? So he was the one that two of his students was Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. They were the two to take him out from Yerushalayim and bring him to the Roman Caesar, Roman Empire, whatever, Roman Emperor, and then he asked for Yavne. So they were his greatest Talmidim, and Rabbi Yehoshua was a great sage, and according to what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says on Rabbi Yehoshua, Ashrei Yoladeto. Now, Rabbi Akiva, we all know him, or we all know the Talmud talks about him in Nedarim, in Baba Metzia, talking about the idea of what, that he was not a great scholar until the age of 40, then he became a tremendous scholar, and they had midot and everything, but we don't really know about his parents. He did not come from a rabbinic dynasty. Then we have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that we don't know too much about his family, but we do know that he was a Talmid of Rabbi Akiva. And we know a lot about Rabbi Shimon, sat in the cave with his son, and all of. So just a little bit. Now, who was Rabban Gamliel? Rabban Gamliel was a Tana, and there are many Rabban Gamliels. We need to always to define this. Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And I guess only Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was Yehuda, okay, not a Gamliel or a Shimon. Okay, so he was the head of the Sanhedrin, and then his son's name one was Shimon and one was Gamliel. Okay, that's what we saw before. So now the Gemara says like that: Amri ad kama netzare v'neizil. בראש השנה אשתקד צערה, בבחורות במעשה דרבי צדוק צערה, הכנה מצערה, תא ונעברה. Okay, so the Talmidim sits in the Beit Midrash, And Rabban Gamliel, you remember the story? Rabban Gamliel was told that Rabbi Yoshua making a psak against him for the third time. Rabban Gamliel had enough, he says, get out. Not get out, sorry, stand on your feet while I'm talking. That's also totally a disrespect to Rabbi Yoshua, and he's older probably, so it's hard for him to stand up all day long. So the Talmidim says, you know what, enough. Ta v'na'avre. Bow, and we will remove Rabban Gamliel. Now, this is an interesting thing, Bemet, when you think about it from a political, religious perspective. You have the Talmidim, who definitely has the fear from the rabbis. They stand up for one rabbi against another one. So, on one hand, miscalculation of Rabban Gamliel. He pushed the envelope too much. B, for me, it shows that there was still a sense of freedom and independent thinking. Meaning, when I see a rabbi being treated like that, what do? I don't just go with the flow. I stand up and say, what? That's not right. See what you do. You are using your power that was bestowed upon you as the president for your own advantage. Ta v'na'avre. Let's remove him. So then this is a rule that we all need to remember, before you get rid of someone, you need to know what's coming next. Okay? Because sometimes the guy who comes next, you will miss the guy who was there before. Exactly. So that's where it comes from. So the Gemara says like that. Nukme le Rabbi Yoshua, if we're going to what? To appoint Rabbi Yoshua. Baal Maasehu. What does that mean? It will not be nice. Yeah. He was the one, he was the cause. I'm not blaming him, but he's the one. It's like putting that in your eyes, Rabban Gamliel. You bothered Rabbi Yoshua, now Rabbi Yoshua is going to take your position. It's too much. Nukme de Rabbi Akiva, maybe we should appoint Rabbi Akiva. Dilma anishle delet leschut avot. Maybe he will punish him. Rabban Gamliel will punish Rabbi Akiva. Why? And how that punishment will apply on Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Akiva does not have the merit of his parents. Meaning his parents were not scholars. He was just a regular guy, meaning his parents. And he became a scholar, but Rabban Gamliel has zchut avot. And therefore we shouldn't risk Rabbi Akiva. Interesting, nachon? First, the idea that Rabban Gamliel would like to take revenge and will try to punish whoever is going to be in his position. That itself is a bit strange. And B, the fact that with all the Torah that Rabbi Akiva has, Rabban Gamliel can punish him because he does not have zchut avot. Like, what do you want from Rabbi Akiva? I don't understand. He was just born to that family. But look what he did for himself. Yeah. So it seems to be that zchut avot, meaning the idea that you came from a lineage, yichus, that was something that was imbued in the process of what? Imbued in the process of what? Of electing the next leader. So, elanuk mele Rab Lazar ben Azariah. So we'll put Rab Lazar ben Azariah. Lama? Dehu chacham, he's smart, vehu ashir. He's also wealthy. Vehu asiri le'ezra. And he's 10th generation to Ezra. Sometimes when I read it, it doesn't say that his father was kacha, but he was 10th generation to Ezra. Whenever I read this Gemara, I say, and I am the 20th generation to Avraham Avinu. מה הקשר? Like, bishlama, zchut avot, I'm talking about what? My father, my grandfather. בסדר, זכות אבות, everyone has the זכות of אברהם, יצחק, יעקב, שרה, רבקה, רחל ולאה. נו, מה זה קשור? גם לרבי עקיבא יש.
Wasn't there anybody worthy in between also?
Probably not. It's a pretty sad description of what's going on in Eretz Israel when we know exactly, 2nd century. Because all the rabbis are the Tanaim of the 2nd century. Yes?
There
10 generations or 7 generations?
Yeah, 10.
Similar idea.
Yeah, but
Why?
we're right. And it's also, it's like a little weird. You can say, why Rabbi Elazar ben Azar? Because his father was a rabbi and his grandfather was a rabbi, 10th generation to Ezra. Now, it might include that each one since Ezra until Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a scholar, but whatever, okay. Hu chacham, he's smart. Di'imak shele mefarik le. Because he's smart. How do we know he's smart? Because if you ask him a question, he knows how to solve it. Okay, I would assume that many people in the Bet Midrash would be able to do it, but maybe not. V'hu ashir, he's wealthy. Because if he had dealings with the Caesar, he can go and he can also show that he's wealthy, he's like an equal to the Caesar. V'hu asiri le'Ezra, in his 10th generation to Ezra, de'it le'schut avot ve'lo matzi anishle. He has schut avot, he has yichus, and Rabban Gamliel will not be able to punish him. Meaning, the schut avot that Rabban Gamliel has will not overcome the schut avot that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah has. Now, this is a question that you didn't ask me, and you should have. Rabbi, let's say that the son can replace his father b'chokhmah ve'beirat shamayim. However, 3 years later, the son becomes what? Corrupt. Can we remove him? If you tell me that if God says that you can basically give your position as an inheritance to your children and your children's children, can I remove him and appoint someone else not from the family? Let's say the leadership of the Kehillah, let's say. But do we have the ability to do it? A, and B, can we appoint someone who is not from the family? Because then we are actively going against what? And let's say he has other children. Not that if it was only one child, whatever. But let's say he does not have any other children. He does have children. Can we remove him and put someone else? So here it seems to be that they did, right? But I don't know what was the situation. Maybe Rabban Gamliel did not have any children at that moment. I don't know. No idea. But the idea is that it seems to be that you are capable of removing someone. And here, by the way, Rabban Gamliel was not immoral, God forbid, or unethical. The only thing that he did was what? He used his power in order to teach Rabbi Yoshua a lesson, and also, to some extent, Rabban Gamliel tried to minimize the machlokot. Okay.
That's
What?
What's wrong with that? Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, but there is a way to do it. There is one way to minimize machlokot by saying, okay, please let me know your opinion, and then I'll prove you wrong. And then there is another way to say the opinion, I'm not interested in your opinion, and if you want to express your opinion, you are not welcome to do it. And then there is no machloket. Yes.
Seems to be more biblical.
Well, what?
The lineage for the Malchus seems to be more biblical than the lineage for the Messiah.
Yes and no. When you read Sefer Melachim, you see that not always the son became the king. A. B. If you go to the Middle Ages and everything, then you see that most of the times rabbinic positions and dayanut positions would go to whom? To the children.
Nepotism.
Yeah.
Is a very big deal.
Okay. By the way, just as a side note, you can see it also in the judicial system and in the medical system. It's almost like you need to be grandfathered in. You don't have too many new names. Also in the academia, it's almost the same names, just different children. So every what do you call it? Every mikzoa, every profession likes to keep it in the family. Yes.
Why is the kahuna totally different? I'm a kain because my father was a kain, right? I'm a kain. I can be Machal Shabbos. I can do. I'm a kain. Why that can't you take a kain and make a mois kain? Even the kain gadol was never removed. No, but he died because the Reichland.
So the question is, let's say we can remove a rabbi here, we can remove a king, we can never remove a Kohen. So the idea is that there is a huge distinction between what you get as a Cohen and what you get as a king or a position. First, you get authority. As a Cohen, I don't want to burst your bubble, but you have zero authority. You have an obligation to give me a bracha. You have an obligation to bring the korban. You have an obligation to keep yourself kadosh. You have an obligation not to marry specific women. And you have all those obligations. You have no koach. No one. Nothing. You don't make any decisions for me. You are basically, serve me, help me to serve God in the Bet HaMikdash. You are a teacher, but that's it. You are what they call it today, an influencer. Okay? But you are not an authority. All the other appointments are obviously an appointments of authority. So then there is somewhat of a, what we call a kind of a benefit for the people. And then if the people are not happy, they might be able to remove you. Okay. Sorry for bursting your bubble. Please give me a bracha tomorrow too. Yes?
Coming forward, there's a big problem in the shidduch community because people want to know yichus. They don't want to look too dead. Like I said to my granddaughter, don't worry about the black hat or the black jacket. Make sure she ain't shahot po.
Okay. So obviously, like in every phenomena, the idea of yichus became now, it's overrated to the extent that you don't need to care about who I am. You just need to know that my grandfather was the shochet from Notre Dame. I don't know. So the thing is what? Is that obviously we all understand yichus is great, but and that's what you have, the story of Rabbi Zusha. That's what Chassidut, for example, part of Chassidut was, they looked at the mitnagdim, and the mitnagdim there is the yichus and the lomdesh, and if you are not, you are nothing. And Zusha and others, the stories, the famous story, it's not about what was your father, it's about you. How do you are the best version of yourself, even if you are a balagole. Okay? That's what it is. How can you be the best, most spiritual balagole in the community? So these stories that we grew up with in kindergarten basically reflect this idea. But in the time of the Tanaim, at least in the 2nd century, you need to have zchut avot. Also, I think it's part of what we spoke about at the beginning, nobility. If I want to send someone to talk to the Caesar in Rome, you need to introduce the guy. So we're going to introduce, this is Rabbi Akiva. His father was a shepherd. His grandfather was a shepherd. And you know what his great-grandfather did? Also a shepherd. But he became a scholar. The Roman Caesar would look at him and say, get him out of here. If you bring Elazar ben Azariah, or Rabban Gamliel, says, this is Elazar ben Azariah. He's the 10th generation to Ezra. Ezra the scribe. That Koresh gave him permission to build the second Bet Mikdash. He came to Israel, he was a leader, he brought with him 40,000 Jews, and he created the revolution. He's compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. Ooh, the Roman Caesar will be, no, now you're talking. He will also feel insulted if you send him someone. Give me a story from the Talmud that there was that concern, but he took the risk. Okay, that's so vague. You will not be able to understand it. Gvia ben Psisa, you remember that story? About when the Egyptians and the Canaanites and from Africa, the people from Africa came to the Roman Caesar and they complained the Jewish people are thieves. The Egyptians came along and says, they took all of our stuff on a loan and they never gave it back to us. And the same thing with Africa, with some people in Africa and Canaanim. And so the Roman Caesar sent a message to the Jews: you are being sued. You need to protect yourself somehow. So the rabbis didn't know who to send. So Gvia ben Psisa, who was not exactly the most represented, what would you call it? Will not be the first choice to send to as a delegation to the king. He says, no, send me. If I lose, said, he's just a lousy Jew. He just went. But then I'm sorry, we're going to send a higher delegator. But if I win, so I win. So that's what he did, and he really won. But at the beginning, he was obviously dismissed. So the idea is what? That yichus and zchut avot, it is something interesting. I brought this Gemara, not only for what we spoke now, but also regarding the idea of that even after someone is being placed in his father's position, if he does not behave appropriately, someone, some kind of a group, the students here or someone, has the ability to what? To remove him. Okay. Now, Yerushalmi. We need to finish, right? נכון, because of Mincha. Okay. בעזרת Hashem, בפעם הבאה we will conclude. So keep those papers if you can, or maybe give it to the front desk.